Green smiled, feeling a rare but genuine sense of accomplishment. Thank you. I learned that change doesn't happen overnight, but if you're committed to being better every day, it adds up. Remember, this job is about people first, and if you keep that in mind, you'll make a difference. The recruit nodded, clearly moved by her words, and Green felt a new sense of purpose fill her. She was no longer the strict, by-the-book officer she once was. She had become someone who understood that compassion and responsibility could coexist. She had come full circle, finding redemption not only in her actions but in the positive impact she now had on others. Months turned into a year, and Vanessa continued her work, building on the reforms she had helped bring to life. One evening, as she was cleaning out her office for a remodel, she stumbled upon a file of documents related to her own detainment, a stark reminder of the day that had sparked this journey. She held the papers in her hands, reading the notes and statements from that time, each page filled with details of an experience that had once caused her so much pain. But as she skimmed the documents, she felt no anger, only a quiet pride in how far she and everyone involved had come. This file, she realized, was no longer a painful memory. It was a testament to resilience, a reminder of the strength it took to turn a moment of indignity into a legacy of change. Vanessa carefully packed the file away, deciding to keep it as a personal memento. This journey would forever be part of who she was, a reminder that even the hardest trials could become the foundation for growth and healing. At the end of the year, the city council invited Vanessa to deliver a keynote speech at a gala honoring local leaders. As she took the stage in a shimmering ballroom, surrounded by hundreds of community members, friends, and fellow leaders, Vanessa felt a deep sense of closure. She spoke of her journey, the obstacles she'd faced, and the power of standing up for what was right. She shared how the reforms had transformed her community, bringing people together in ways she hadn't imagined possible. As she finished, Vanessa looked out over the crowd, her heart full. This journey taught me that change starts with one person willing to take a stand. It taught me that forgiveness, growth, and unity are stronger than any division. I hope each of you carries this legacy forward, believing that together, we can continue to make a difference. The audience rose in applause, the sound echoing through the room. As Vanessa left the stage, she was met with a sea of faces, smiling, grateful, proud. Among them, she saw Officer Green, her expression soft and warm, a testament to the journey they had shared. The two women exchanged a look, one of understanding and mutual respect, and Vanessa felt a profound sense of peace. Years later, the Building Bridges program continued to thrive, expanding across the state and serving as a model for communities nationwide. Vanessa's legacy lived on in every town hall, every community forum, every conversation between officers and civilians striving for a better understanding of one another. Vanessa herself went on to become an influential leader, inspiring others to pursue justice, equality, and unity. She continued to work in public service, her story a beacon of resilience and hope for countless others. Officer Green retired with honor, having dedicated the final years of her career to mentoring young officers and promoting compassionate policing. In her retirement, she volunteered with the Community Review Board, ensuring that her journey of accountability continued to serve as a model for those who followed in her footsteps. And in the hearts of all who had been touched by their story, the message remained clear, that with courage, humility, and a commitment to growth, even the most challenging experiences could lead to a brighter, more compassionate world. Thank you for joining us on this journey of resilience, change, and redemption. Vanessa's story reminds us that every voice matters and that standing up for what's right can bring about real, lasting change. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more inspiring tales like it, don't forget to like this video, share it with others, and subscribe to our channel. Hit the notification bell to stay updated on our latest stories that bring hope, compassion, and unity to the forefront. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story. Stay inspired. Meet Vanessa Carter, a dedicated state senator who finds herself in an unexpected confrontation with law enforcement after a simple shopping trip goes wrong. What starts as a routine encounter spirals into a shocking moment of mistaken assumptions and tension that tests Vanessa's resilience. But Vanessa isn't the kind to back down. She sees this as her chance to stand up not only for herself but for her entire community. As the story unfolds, you'll witness Vanessa's relentless pursuit of justice, a surprising apology, and a journey that challenges not only Vanessa but also those who doubted her. Will her courage inspire change? Or will the forces against her be too great to overcome? If you're ready to experience this story of hope and transformation, make sure to like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories. Let's dive in. The sun filtered through the blinds of the small, bustling diner on a warm Saturday morning. Vanessa Carter sat across from her mother, Lydia, at their favorite booth, the smell of coffee and buttered toast surrounding them like a warm hug. The quiet hum of the diner was interrupted only by the clinking of cups and the occasional laughter from other tables. For Vanessa, these breakfasts with her mother were like stepping into a safe harbor. It was a slice of life that reminded her of who she was before the title of senator was added in front of her name. She wore a simple blue blouse and jeans today, a break from the tailored suits she wore during the week. Her smile softened as she looked at Lydia, who, with her gentle but knowing eyes, always saw right through her. "You look tired, honey," Lydia said, her eyes narrowing in gentle concern as she buttered a slice of toast. "Been working too hard?" Vanessa chuckled. "Since when is that new?" she asked, trying to downplay the long hours. "District 12 has me busy. There's a proposal on housing affordability that's been giving me all kinds of headaches." Lydia's face softened as she reached across the table, taking Vanessa's hand. "Vanessa, I know you've got a lot of people counting on you, but don't forget to take care of yourself, too." Vanessa gave her mother's hand a reassuring squeeze. "I promise I'm trying, Mom," she said with a smile. "Once this bill is behind me, I'll take a break. Maybe a weekend away somewhere. Just us two." Lydia raised an eyebrow. "Oh, don't make promises you won't keep now. I know you too well. Always too busy for a real break." They both laughed, and the sound was comforting. For a moment, Vanessa felt like a young woman again, free from the burdens of politics and expectations. But she knew her mother's concern was rooted in truth. She had made sacrifices for her career, and Lydia had been the one who'd always reminded her of them. Being one of the few black state senators in their state came with more challenges than she could ever have anticipated. But it was a responsibility she took with pride and care. All right, she conceded. "I'll text you next weekend, and we'll figure something out. Maybe I'll even let you pick the spot." "Oh, you'll let me, huh?" Lydia replied, her eyes twinkling with mock indignation. "Well, in that case, I'll pick somewhere with a hot spring spa and no cell service." Vanessa laughed, imagining herself trying to sneak work emails in between spa treatments. But it was a nice thought, a luxury even to imagine disconnecting for a while. As they finished breakfast, Vanessa glanced at her phone. There was a message from her assistant, reminding her of the groceries she needed for an upcoming event in her district office. She pocketed the phone, but not before her mother noticed the slight furrow in her brow. "Still can't get away, can you?" Lydia asked gently. "Just a reminder to pick up a few things for an office event," Vanessa replied with a shrug. "It's nothing. I'll grab them on the way home." They paid their bill, hugged goodbye, and as Vanessa walked out into the warmth of the day, she felt that lingering warmth of her mother's love wrapping around her. It gave her the strength she needed to tackle another week in the public eye. The grocery store was quiet for a Saturday afternoon, and Vanessa moved leisurely down the aisles, gathering supplies. She loaded her cart with snacks and a few drinks, and added some coffee supplies for the staff lounge. Her assistant had been specific about the brand. "The good stuff, or everyone will be cranky on Monday," she'd written in the note. Pushing her cart to the checkout, Vanessa noticed a few heads turn as she approached. She knew she was becoming a familiar face in her district, but she still wasn't entirely used to the recognition. After a quick chat with the cashier, she paid, gathered her bags, and headed out toward the parking lot. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the asphalt, and the lot was mostly empty. Vanessa strolled to her car, her mind still on the upcoming bill she was working on. She'd been debating some last-minute changes, and an email from a housing advocate had just given her some food for thought. As she approached her car, Vanessa was pulled from her thoughts by a sharp, commanding voice behind her. "Excuse me, ma'am. Could you stop right there?" Startled, Vanessa turned to see a police officer striding toward her. The officer, a middle-aged woman with a tightly wound bun and a hard look in her eyes, moved with purpose. Vanessa's heart picked up pace, and she instinctively put her hand on her chest, where her ID badge rested beneath her blouse. "Yes, officer? Is something wrong?" she asked, trying to keep her voice calm, though she could feel the prickle of anxiety creeping in. The officer, whose badge read Officer Green, scrutinized Vanessa, her gaze moving from the grocery bags in Vanessa's hands to her face, as if trying to assess a hidden threat. "You mind telling me what you're doing out here?" Green asked, her tone clipped and formal. Vanessa blinked, caught off guard by the question. "Just picking up groceries," she replied. She lifted one of the bags as if to emphasize her point, her face calm but her pulse racing. "ID, please," Officer Green demanded, her hand resting firmly on her belt. Vanessa's stomach twisted, but she kept her face composed. She knew better than to let her emotions show. "Officer, I haven't done anything wrong. Do you mind explaining why you need my ID?" Officer Green's eyes narrowed, her fingers tapping against her belt. "Let's make this simple, ma'am. Just show me some ID, and I'll decide if there's any reason to be concerned." Taking a steadying breath, Vanessa pulled her wallet out of her purse, her fingers moving methodically despite the slight tremor. She handed over her ID, feeling a surge of frustration and embarrassment prickling under her skin. Green snatched the ID and examined it, her eyes flicking up to Vanessa's face once more. "Vanessa Carter," she read aloud, though there was no hint of recognition in her voice. "Yes, I'm a state senator," Vanessa replied, her voice firm, though she struggled to keep it steady. "I represent District 12. For a moment, Green hesitated, but then she pocketed the ID as though it were evidence. Vanessa's heart skipped a beat. "Senator or not, something doesn't sit right with me," Green muttered, her eyes fixed on Vanessa's. "You're going to need to come with me." Vanessa's mouth dropped open. She knew better than to escalate the situation, but disbelief and indignation made her pulse race. "Officer, this is a public parking lot. I have every right to be here." Green folded her arms, her posture firm and unmoving, blocking Vanessa's way. "You can explain that downtown." Vanessa could feel the eyes of a few passers-by on her as Green led her toward the cruiser, ignoring her attempts to reason with her. The indignity of it stung deeply, and Vanessa found herself thinking of her mother's parting words. Lydia had warned her of challenges, but nothing like this. As the cruiser pulled away, Vanessa sat in the back seat, feeling the weight of Green's judgment pressing down on her. She took deep breaths, telling herself she would be free soon, that there was nothing to hold her on. But the frustration and humiliation were undeniable, simmering beneath the surface as she looked out the window, wondering how things could have gone so wrong so quickly. The cruiser's engine hummed as Officer Green drove with a stony focus, her eyes never leaving the road. Vanessa sat silently in the back seat, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her gaze turned toward the passing scenery but unfocused. It was the first time in a long while that she'd felt so powerless, so reduced to nothing more than a suspect. In the brief silence, her mind drifted to moments from her life that had led her to this role. Memories of late nights spent studying in law school, inspired by the vision of creating a better world, a fairer system for people like her. Her heart ached at the irony of it. She had dedicated herself to change, yet here she was, confined and unrecognized, reduced to assumptions about her character based solely on her presence in a parking lot. After what felt like an endless drive, they arrived at the police station. Officer Green parked, then opened the cruiser door and gestured for Vanessa to step out. Vanessa's legs felt heavy as she got out, her heels clicking on the pavement. Her mind raced with questions, with disbelief, with frustration, but she swallowed it all. This was no time for emotions to take control. They walked through the station's double doors, where Vanessa could feel the curious stares of officers and staff as she passed. Murmurs followed her, the echo of whispers bouncing off the walls, wondering who she was, why she was here. Her sense of dignity felt chipped away with each step, but she straightened her back, determined to maintain a calm exterior. Officer Green led her down a hall and stopped before a small, bare room. The walls were a stark white, the fluorescent lights too bright, casting an almost clinical air over everything. A metal table with 2 chairs stood in the middle, as if waiting for some interrogation to take place. Vanessa's stomach tightened. "Wait here," Green said curtly, nodding toward one of the chairs. Vanessa looked at her with steady eyes, determined not to let the officer see the flicker of discomfort that threatened to show. She sat down without a word, folding her hands on the table. Green gave her a brief, hard look, then left the room, closing the door behind her with a heavy thud. The silence that followed was deafening. Vanessa took a deep breath, willing her heart to slow. She could feel its rapid, rhythmic thumping beneath her palm, but she focused on her breathing, centering herself. There was no reason to be afraid, she told herself. She hadn't done anything wrong. But that thought didn't wash away the sting of humiliation. Minutes passed, though they felt like hours. Vanessa's mind filled with the unfairness of it all, the assumptions made, the doubt cast over her character without any basis. But she pushed those thoughts aside, channeling her frustration into the quiet resolve that had carried her through so much of her life. Eventually, the door opened, and in walked a tall man in a neatly pressed suit, with a kind but authoritative demeanor. He introduced himself as Lieutenant Jordan Pierce, and he held out his hand with a faint, polite smile.
Senator Carter, I'm Lieutenant Pierce.
I apologize for any inconvenience you may have experienced. His voice was calm, professional, but tinged with a hint of regret as he looked over the sparse room and back to Vanessa. Vanessa shook his hand, grateful for the touch of courtesy, though she kept her face carefully neutral. "Thank you, Lieutenant. I'd appreciate if someone could explain why I was brought here today." Pierce's expression shifted as he opened a small folder he carried, quickly flipping through a hastily written report. He raised his eyebrows, clearly perplexed as he read Officer Green's account. "It says here that Officer Green found you acting suspiciously in the parking lot?" He looked up, his expression one of disbelief. "Is this accurate, Officer Green?" The door creaked open, and Officer Green stepped into the room, unaware of Pierce's tone and the scrutiny in his gaze. She handed him Vanessa's ID, her expression hard as ever. "Yes, sir." She was wandering around the lot, and it looked suspicious. Pierce's eyes narrowed, his gaze sharp as he glanced at Vanessa's ID again, noting the title before her name. "Officer Green, do you realize who you've detained?" he asked, his voice calm but with an edge of disappointment. Green shifted slightly, her composure slipping. Well, I saw her ID, but I didn't." "This is Senator Vanessa Carter," he interrupted, his tone firm. "She's one of the most respected leaders in our state." A flush of embarrassment crept up Green's cheeks as she stammered, searching for words. I didn't know, sir." Pierce held up a hand, his voice cold. "It was your duty to check her credentials properly. Senator Carter is not a person who poses any threat, nor should she be subjected to unwarranted suspicion." He turned to Vanessa, his face softening. "I apologize, Senator. You should not have been treated this way." Vanessa took a breath, gathering her thoughts. "Thank you, Lieutenant," she said, her voice calm but firm. "I don't hold your entire department accountable for one officer's actions, but I do think an explanation is warranted." Pierce turned back to Green, his gaze piercing. "Officer Green?" Green's eyes darted to the floor, her confidence dwindling as she fumbled for words. I thought she might be someone else," she mumbled, unable to meet Vanessa's gaze. Pierce shook his head. "Assumptions are not part of our protocol, officer. We don't make decisions based on appearances." This was entirely unnecessary. His voice held an edge of reprimand, a warning that echoed in the small room. By now, a few other officers had gathered outside the room, peering in with curiosity. The unfolding drama was too compelling to ignore. Vanessa could hear their whispers, sense their judgment passing from Green to herself, and she steeled herself, determined to remain dignified. Pierce straightened, his posture firm as he turned back to Green. "Officer Green, I'm afraid I have no choice but to suspend you, pending an investigation." Green's face turned a deep shade of red, her jaw tightening as the words sank in. She wanted to protest, to defend herself, but something in Pierce's eyes told her it would only make things worse. With a faint nod, she mumbled, "Yes, sir." Her gaze fixed on the floor. Vanessa rose, her calm exterior still intact. "Lieutenant Pierce," she said, her tone even, "I appreciate the immediate response. I'm willing to move past this incident, but I do want assurances that no one else will face similar treatment." Pierce nodded solemnly. "I assure you, Senator, we'll take corrective measures. Officer Green will be held accountable for her actions." With a final, steady look, Vanessa left the station, her steps measured, her head held high. She could feel the curious eyes on her as she exited, but she didn't look back. Outside, Vanessa paused for a moment, taking in a breath of fresh air as she gazed at the horizon. The encounter had shaken her, but it had also fueled her resolve. She would take this experience and use it, amplify it, to push for reform and greater awareness. In the midst of her frustration and anger, a glimmer of purpose emerged. Today was only the beginning. Vanessa Carter's office was unusually quiet the following Monday morning. The typical buzz of staff hurrying in and out of meetings, answering phones, and handling constituent concerns had settled into a strange, hushed energy. Vanessa's assistant, Morgan, a dedicated young woman with a no-nonsense approach, knocked on Vanessa's door before entering, her expression careful. "Senator, your lawyer's here," Morgan said, her voice low. "Are you ready to meet with him?" Vanessa glanced up from the paperwork on her desk. She hadn't stopped thinking about Saturday's events. The incident had become more than a personal affront. It was now a matter of principle. A moment like that didn't just disappear from the mind. It left an imprint that couldn't be ignored. She nodded. "Send him in, please." Morgan held the door open as a tall, middle-aged man with a calm, professional demeanor walked in. Dressed in a tailored suit, he extended a hand to Vanessa, giving her a warm smile that softened the hard edge in his gaze. "Senator Carter, it's a pleasure to finally meet you in person," he said.
I'm James Pratt.
"I'll be representing you as we move forward." "Thank you, James," Vanessa said, shaking his hand. "I appreciate your time." James took a seat across from her and opened a file folder. "I've read the preliminary report from your arrest, and I think we both agree that what happened was a clear violation of your rights," he said. "We have options, Senator. We could file a formal complaint with the department, pursue legal action for damages, or both." Vanessa leaned back, folding her hands thoughtfully. "I've been going over that myself. I don't want to escalate things if we don't have to, but I want accountability. I want this to serve as a warning that these types of assumptions have real consequences." James nodded, looking impressed. "That's a reasonable approach. We could draft a letter demanding a public apology from the police department and request that Officer Green be required to undergo additional training. We could also suggest a meeting to discuss potential policy changes to prevent this from happening to anyone else." Vanessa's eyes lit up at the mention of policy reform. She'd seen firsthand how quickly assumptions could snowball into injustice, and now she had a chance to use her experience to create real, lasting change. "I like that approach," she replied, her tone resolute. "Let's start with the letter and request a meeting. I want them to know this isn't about revenge. This is about fairness, and making sure no one else endures this kind of humiliation." James took out a notepad, jotting down a few notes. "Consider it done, Senator. I'll draft the letter by the end of the day." A few days later, Vanessa's letter, along with news of her arrest, hit the local news circuit. The media quickly picked up on the story, portraying the incident as an unfortunate example of discrimination in law enforcement. Vanessa hadn't expected such widespread attention, but she knew the story had resonated with people who had endured similar experiences or knew someone who had. Messages of support began to flood in from all corners. Friends, family, and even former constituents she hadn't seen in years reached out, expressing their shock and encouragement. But the public reaction wasn't entirely positive. As is often the case with high-profile incidents, the situation drew skeptics and critics as well. One evening, as Vanessa sat in her living room reviewing her speech for an upcoming event, her phone buzzed with a call from her best friend, Claire. "Vanessa, I just saw the news," Claire said, her voice brimming with concern. "How are you holding up?" Vanessa sighed, closing her laptop.
I'm all right.
"It's been a whirlwind, to say the least." Claire was silent for a moment. "Are you sure you're doing okay? I know you're strong, but this can't be easy." Vanessa softened, her friend's words touching a vulnerable part of her. "It's tough," she admitted. "It's one thing to be embarrassed in private, but when everyone's watching, it's different. I just keep reminding myself that this is bigger than me now. I have a chance to change something here." Claire's voice grew firm. "And you're the perfect person to do it. Just know you've got a lot of people behind you." Vanessa felt a small swell of warmth at her friend's words. "Thank you, Claire. It helps to know I'm not alone." As they hung up, Vanessa's mind wandered back to the letter her lawyer had sent to the police department. She hadn't yet heard a response from them, and the silence was weighing on her. But she remained hopeful that the department would recognize the opportunity to address the situation thoughtfully. Meanwhile, back at the police station, Officer Bethany Green was facing a different kind of fallout. Lieutenant Pierce had informed her of the suspension, and she had become the subject of hushed conversations among her colleagues. Each glance, each whisper, felt like a judgment, and it made her uncomfortable in a way she hadn't felt in years. Green sat in a cramped meeting room, staring blankly at the wall as she waited for the internal review to begin. She hadn't expected her decision to detain Vanessa would cause such a stir, and she certainly hadn't anticipated the public backlash that was now threatening her career. The door opened, and Lieutenant Pierce entered, followed by two members of the Internal Affairs team. They took their seats across from Green, their expressions unreadable. "Officer Green," Pierce began, his tone cold and formal, "I trust you understand the gravity of the situation we're facing. Your actions have cast a negative light on this department, and we have to hold you accountable." Green swallowed, her throat dry. "I was just doing my job, sir. I didn't know she was a senator." Pierce's gaze hardened. "This isn't about her position, officer. This is about your decision to act on assumptions without evidence. We can't have officers using personal biases to dictate how they handle civilians." Green opened her mouth to respond, but Pierce held up a hand. "Right now, you're suspended with pay while we conduct a thorough review. You'll also be required to attend additional training sessions on bias and de-escalation techniques." She clenched her jaw, feeling a pang of indignation but realizing that arguing would only make matters worse. She nodded, her gaze falling to the table. "Yes, sir." Pierce's tone softened slightly, though his gaze remained firm. "I hope you understand that this isn't just about you. It's about the department's integrity. We can't afford to lose the public's trust." The room fell silent as Green absorbed the words. She had always seen herself as a dedicated, principled officer, but this moment forced her to consider the impact of her actions in a way she never had before. Several days later, Vanessa received an email from Lieutenant Pierce, requesting a meeting to discuss the department's response to her letter. The message was polite and carefully worded, with a hint of genuine regret that reassured her. She responded immediately, agreeing to meet at a neutral location, a small community center where they could have the discussion away from the media's prying eyes. When the day of the meeting arrived, Vanessa walked into the center's meeting room, feeling a mix of anticipation and nerves. James Pratt was by her side, his calm presence a comforting reminder of the strength of her legal position. Lieutenant Pierce entered a moment later, his posture respectful but slightly weary. He extended a hand to Vanessa, who shook it with a steady grip. "Senator Carter, thank you for agreeing to meet," he said, his tone sincere. "We want to address your concerns and discuss how we can prevent incidents like this from happening in the future." Vanessa nodded, gesturing for him to sit. "I appreciate that, Lieutenant. I'm not here to punish anyone. But I do believe we need to make changes. Changes that ensure all citizens are treated with the respect they deserve." Pierce looked thoughtful, his gaze sincere. "Our department is open to any constructive suggestions. We're committed to rebuilding the trust this situation has damaged." Vanessa glanced at James, who nodded encouragingly. Turning back to Pierce, she continued, "I'd like to propose a review of your officers' training materials, with a specific focus on community engagement and implicit bias. No one should be subjected to assumptions that could lead to unjust treatment." Pierce listened intently, nodding as he took notes. "That's a fair suggestion. We've already arranged additional training for Officer Green, but we could expand it department-wide. It's a step in the right direction." They spent the next hour discussing potential reforms and steps to rebuild public trust. Pierce promised to take her proposals seriously, and when they shook hands at the end of the meeting, Vanessa felt a glimmer of hope. This was only the beginning of the process, but it was a step forward, a small victory in the name of fairness and equality. As Vanessa walked out of the community center, a weight lifted from her shoulders. She was reminded again of why she had pursued public service, why she had endured the long hours and challenging days. This was the reason, to use her voice and her position to bring about change, even in the face of adversity. The next morning, Vanessa's office was flooded with phone calls and emails from reporters, constituents, and advocacy groups. The story had taken on a life of its own, spreading across social media and igniting passionate debates in the public sphere. Local news stations were now covering it, with headlines that read, "Senator wrongfully detained by local police," and "Community demands justice after unjust arrest." Despite her resolve to focus on meaningful change, Vanessa found herself overwhelmed by the sheer attention her case had drawn. Some media outlets expressed outrage on her behalf, while others questioned her motives, suggesting she might be using the situation to draw attention to her political agenda. In her office, Vanessa sat at her desk, scrolling through the messages on her phone. A number of her supporters had reached out, expressing their outrage and vowing to stand by her, but the criticism was impossible to ignore. She found herself reading each comment, each thread, feeling the sting of every accusation that questioned her integrity. Morgan, her assistant, peeked in through her office door, her face etched with concern. "Senator, there's a news crew from Channel 7 outside asking for a statement. Do you want me to ask them to leave?" Vanessa looked up, momentarily startled by the request. "Channel 7?" she repeated, trying to gather her thoughts. "Yes, they're right outside the building," Morgan said. "I think they want you to comment on what's been happening." Vanessa hesitated, glancing at the small pile of notes she'd been preparing for an upcoming community meeting. Part of her wanted to tell the reporters her side of the story directly, to use her voice and her experience to stand up against what had happened to her. But she also knew that one misstep could make things worse, adding fuel to an already volatile situation. "Tell them that I'll be addressing everything at the community forum next week," Vanessa finally said, her voice firm. "I want to do this on my own terms, with the people I serve." Morgan nodded and left to relay the message. Vanessa took a deep breath, reminding herself to stay grounded. This wasn't just about her. It was about making sure others didn't have to endure the same humiliation and frustration. Back at the police station, Officer Bethany Green found herself under an unfamiliar and uncomfortable scrutiny. The suspension had left her in an odd state of limbo, still employed but unable to perform her usual duties. Her colleagues, who once regarded her with respect and even a touch of admiration for her no-nonsense approach, now looked at her with a mix of caution and curiosity. One afternoon, she sat alone in a quiet break room, her coffee growing cold on the table in front of her. The whispers she'd heard in the hallways seemed to follow her, an ever-present reminder of the judgment she was now under. She could still feel the heat of the looks cast her way by other officers who had taken notice of the incident. Sergeant David Mendez, a fellow officer who had known Bethany since her early days on the force, approached her cautiously. He slid into the seat across from her, setting his coffee mug down with a gentle thud. "Beth," he began, his voice calm but serious, I heard about the meeting with Internal Affairs. How are you holding up? Bethany shifted uncomfortably, glancing down at her coffee cup. I'm fine, she said, her tone clipped. They're just making a big deal out of something that shouldn't have been an issue. I was doing my job. David looked at her thoughtfully, his brow furrowing. I don't know, Beth. From what I've heard, they're saying it was a bit more than that. People feel you overstepped. Bethany's jaw tightened, but she forced herself to stay calm. It wasn't personal, David. I saw someone acting suspiciously, and I did what I thought was right. David paused, considering his words carefully. Look, Beth, I know you take your job seriously, but sometimes we don't see our own blind spots. You have a reputation for being tough, for sure, but maybe it's worth thinking about why this particular situation blew up the way it did. Bethany bristled, defensive. So what, you're saying I was wrong to question her? Just because she's a senator. Suddenly I'm not allowed to do my job. David held up his hands, trying to defuse the tension. I'm not saying that. All I'm saying is that sometimes it's important to ask ourselves if we're making the right calls for the right reasons. It's not just about following protocol. It's about understanding people. Bethany looked away, her gaze fixed on a distant point on the wall. She didn't respond, but David's words lingered in her mind. A quiet but insistent echo she couldn't ignore. The day of the community forum arrived with a charged atmosphere. The small auditorium was filled to capacity, with community members, local leaders, and activists seated side by side. A few camera crews had gathered at the back, ready to capture any statements or dramatic moments that might arise. Vanessa stood off to the side of the stage, her palms damp as she mentally rehearsed her remarks. James, her lawyer, was with her, offering quiet words of support, though she could sense his underlying caution. Just remember, keep it focused on your experience and the need for systemic change, he said. You've got a powerful story, and tonight, you'll have a platform to share it. Vanessa nodded, taking a deep breath. She'd spent days preparing for this, and yet, in the face of all those expectant faces, she felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her. The moderator, a local community leader named Dr. Helen Rivers, approached the podium and introduced Vanessa, inviting her to the stage. As Vanessa stepped forward, the room grew quiet, the air thick with anticipation. Thank you, Dr. Rivers, and thank you to everyone who took the time to be here tonight. Vanessa began, her voice steady but filled with emotion. I stand here today, not only as a state senator but as a member of this community. A community that deserves respect, fairness, and understanding from those who serve it. She paused, allowing her words to settle, feeling the room's attention focus entirely on her. Last week, I was detained in a public parking lot while doing something as simple as loading groceries into my car. I was questioned, scrutinized, and ultimately taken to the police station without cause. She continued, I'm not here to condemn every officer or to accuse the entire police force, but I am here to say that this experience has underscored the need for change, a need to examine how we perceive, judge, and treat one another. As she spoke, Vanessa's eyes scanned the room, noting the nods of agreement from some, the thoughtful expressions of others. She could see her words resonating, her experience connecting with people who had likely faced similar moments of injustice. I'm calling for greater accountability, more comprehensive training, and above all, a commitment to fairness, she said, her voice growing firmer. This isn't just about me. It's about ensuring that no one else has to go through an experience like this. The crowd responded with quiet murmurs of agreement, some applauding softly. Vanessa felt a surge of encouragement, knowing her message was being heard. When she finished her speech, Dr. Rivers returned to the podium, opening the floor to questions. A woman in the front row, her voice shaking slightly, shared a story of a similar experience her teenage son had endured, sparking a ripple of emotional responses from others in the audience. Person after person came forward, sharing their stories, their frustrations, their desire for justice. As Vanessa listened, a sense of solidarity filled the room, a shared resolve that extended far beyond her personal ordeal. This was about the collective experience of a community, a united call for a better, more just system. Later that evening, Officer Green sat alone in her dimly lit living room, scrolling through footage from the community forum on her phone. She had avoided watching it earlier, hoping the entire situation would eventually fade, but something compelled her to look. As she watched Vanessa speak, recounting her experience with grace and determination, Green felt an uncomfortable mix of emotions. For the first time, she found herself wondering if, perhaps, she had overreacted, if maybe her own assumptions had clouded her judgment in that moment. The stories shared by the audience members struck a chord in her. Green had always seen herself as a fair, objective officer, someone who upheld the law without bias. But now, as she listened to the voices of people who had experienced similar injustices, she began to see how easily her own rigid approach could have contributed to a pattern she'd long denied. Her thoughts drifted to the conversation with Sergeant Mendez. His words echoed in her mind, challenging her to look at herself with a critical eye. She didn't want to admit it, but perhaps he was right. As the video ended, Green felt a heaviness settle in her chest. She had a long path ahead of her, one that would require humility and self-reflection, but she resolved to start down it. She owed that to herself, to her community, and most of all, to the people she had wronged. The following week, Vanessa received an email confirming a formal response from the police department. Lieutenant Pierce had invited her to participate in a series of discussions with city officials and law enforcement representatives to address policy reforms. Her legal team was pleased, as this meant the department was taking her recommendations seriously, and it presented a rare opportunity for real change. Sitting in her office, Vanessa gazed out the window, her mind churning with ideas. Her experience was just the tip of an issue that ran much deeper than her case alone. If she could advocate for better training, clearer policies, and a more transparent accountability system, this moment could evolve into something more impactful than she had initially imagined. Her phone buzzed, interrupting her thoughts. It was her lawyer, James Pratt, calling with an update. "Vanessa, I just received word that the police department is officially launching a review of their training procedures," James informed her. "They're open to including community voices in the process, and they'd like you to be involved in drafting the framework." Vanessa felt a surge of satisfaction. This was exactly the outcome she had hoped for. "James, this is incredible," she replied, unable to suppress her smile. "If we can get them to follow through on meaningful reforms, this could prevent countless incidents from ever happening." James's tone softened. "It's a huge step, Vanessa, and it's thanks to you that this is even on the table. But just remember, change like this isn't overnight. It's going to take persistence and patience." Vanessa nodded, her resolve hardening. "Patience I can manage. This is bigger than just me." For Officer Bethany Green, the days following the forum had been a whirlwind of uncomfortable self-reflection. In her decade on the force, she had prided herself on being a no-nonsense officer, someone who kept a strict, by-the-book approach to law enforcement. But now, the realization that her own actions had contributed to a community-wide call for reform left her with a bitter taste of self-doubt. Part of her wanted to justify her actions. After all, she had believed she was protecting the community, staying vigilant. But a larger part of her, a part that was harder to ignore with each passing day, recognized that maybe, just maybe, she'd been wrong. One evening, as Bethany was preparing dinner, she received a call from Sergeant David Mendez, the same colleague who had gently urged her to reconsider her approach. "Hey, Beth," he greeted her, his voice warm but careful. "How's everything going?" Bethany hesitated before responding, her voice softer than usual. "It's been tough. I've had a lot to think about." Mendez didn't rush her. He knew how hard it was for Bethany to let her guard down. "I get it. Change isn't easy, and it takes time to adjust." Bethany felt a pang of gratitude for his understanding. "Thanks, David. It's just, seeing that community forum, hearing Senator Carter speak, it really hit me. I've spent my whole career thinking I was protecting people, but maybe I wasn't seeing the whole picture." David's tone softened even more. "None of us sees the whole picture, Beth. We just do our best. But if this experience helps you see things a little differently, that's a good thing." It doesn't erase the work you've done. It just means you're growing. Bethany let his words sink in, the weight of them wrapping around her like a quiet encouragement. For the first time, she felt a strange but undeniable hope. A chance to make things right, if not immediately, then gradually. "Thanks, David," she said, her voice steady. "I'm going to take this training seriously. I owe it to myself and to the people I serve." 2 weeks later, Vanessa sat in a conference room with a group of city officials, police representatives, and community leaders. The meeting was held in a neutral, modest government building, away from the spotlight of media attention. Lieutenant Pierce was seated across from her, his demeanor attentive and respectful. Vanessa noticed that Officer Green was also in attendance, seated a few chairs down, her posture unusually tense but attentive. The discussion began with Pierce outlining the department's commitment to fostering a healthier relationship with the community. He emphasized their openness to Vanessa's suggestions and welcomed her input on designing a training program that would address biases and improve community engagement. Vanessa listened closely, nodding as she considered each point. When it was her turn to speak, she leaned forward, her tone calm but clear. "One thing I'd like to emphasize is the importance of implicit bias training," she began. "We all have biases, whether we realize it or not. But when those biases go unchecked, they can lead to situations like the one I faced, situations that hurt the trust between officers and the communities they serve." Pierce nodded thoughtfully, making notes as she spoke. The other attendees, including Officer Green, listened closely, absorbing Vanessa's words. Vanessa continued, outlining a proposal for a review board that would allow community members to participate in evaluating certain cases of misconduct. She knew this might be a controversial suggestion, but she believed that giving the public a voice in the process could foster transparency and restore faith in the system. When she finished, she glanced around the room, gauging the reaction. To her relief, most of the officials looked receptive, though cautious. "Senator Carter, I think you make a valid point," Pierce said, meeting her gaze. "It would be a major shift for us, but I agree that the department's relationship with the community could benefit from more transparency." Officer Green raised her hand, surprising the room. She looked hesitant, but after a brief pause, she spoke. "Senator Carter, I want to apologize," Green said, her voice quiet but steady. "I realize now that I let my assumptions cloud my judgment. I'm taking the new training to heart, and I want you to know that I'm committed to doing better." Vanessa looked at Green, taking in the sincerity in her expression. For a moment, the room held a tense silence. Then Vanessa nodded, her face softening. "Thank you, Officer Green. I appreciate your words, and I hope this can be a step toward healing and change for all of us." As news of the police department's reform initiatives began to circulate, the community response was overwhelmingly positive. The local newspaper published an article titled, "A Senator's Stand Sparks Change," highlighting Vanessa's role in pushing for reforms and how the department was working to rebuild its relationship with the community. Vanessa's office received messages of gratitude from constituents and advocacy groups. Some people shared personal stories of times they had felt misunderstood or unfairly judged, expressing their hope that Vanessa's efforts would lead to a lasting impact. One afternoon, Vanessa's assistant, Morgan, entered her office with an envelope addressed to her from a high school student in a neighboring district. Curious, Vanessa opened it and began to read. The letter was from a young woman named Danielle, who wrote about a time when she'd been questioned unfairly while waiting for her mother outside a shopping mall. She explained how the experience had left her feeling powerless, how she'd felt judged solely by her appearance. Danielle thanked Vanessa for standing up for people like her, saying that it gave her hope for a more understanding future. As Vanessa finished reading, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment. She had always believed in the power of public service, but moments like this reminded her why she'd chosen this path. It wasn't just about policies and speeches. It was about making a real difference in people's lives. Morgan, who had been watching her reaction, smiled. "Looks like you've got some new supporters out there." Vanessa nodded, her eyes bright. "It's humbling, really. If this experience can make even one person feel safer, more respected, then it's all worth it." Officer Green's training session was more challenging than she'd anticipated. Led by experts in bias recognition and community relations, the course pushed her to examine her own perspectives, her own assumptions. She was asked to think critically about past interactions, to question why she made certain choices in the field. As the training progressed, Bethany found herself grappling with memories she hadn't considered in years. She recalled moments where she'd felt certain about someone's intentions, only to realize later that her assumptions were misguided. This self-reflection wasn't comfortable, but she began to recognize that growth often required facing the parts of herself she'd long ignored. At the end of the course, she was given a certificate, a small but significant marker of her commitment to self-improvement. As she left the training center, she felt a weight lift off her shoulders, a feeling of redemption and the knowledge that, while she couldn't change the past, she could shape her future. One crisp autumn morning, Vanessa received an invitation to speak at the local police academy's graduation ceremony. The department wanted her to address the new officers, to share her experience and encourage them to lead with fairness and understanding. Standing before the graduates, Vanessa took a deep breath, her voice steady as she spoke. Today, as you embark on your careers, I urge you to remember that every interaction you have will shape the lives of the people you serve. Approach each person with respect, with empathy, and with a commitment to justice. Trust is built one encounter at a time, and it is your duty to protect it. As she spoke, she caught a glimpse of Officer Green in the crowd, her expression one of quiet support. In that moment, Vanessa felt a sense of closure, a feeling that, despite the challenges, this experience had brought her full circle. The audience applauded, and Vanessa left the stage feeling a renewed sense of purpose. The journey had been difficult, but she had made a difference. She had sparked a change, not only in her community but in the hearts of those willing to listen. As the months passed, the initial media attention around Vanessa's experience evolved into a broader conversation about local reform. Vanessa continued to collaborate with Lieutenant Pierce and community leaders to develop policy changes for the police department. They arranged a series of town halls to engage the community in meaningful dialogue about law enforcement and accountability. The first town hall was held at a local church, where community members from all backgrounds gathered to share their thoughts. Vanessa and Pierce sat on a small stage, side by side, ready to listen and respond. Vanessa felt a mixture of pride and anticipation as she looked out over the crowded room. This was the moment she had envisioned when she first decided to pursue justice, not just for herself but for everyone who had felt the sting of misjudgment. After a brief introduction, Dr. Helen Rivers, the moderator, invited a young man from the audience to step up to the microphone. "My name is Marcus," he began, his voice steady but laced with emotion. "I'm here because last year, I went through something similar. I was stopped and questioned while waiting for my friend outside his apartment. It felt like I was guilty until proven innocent, and it changed how I feel about police in my own neighborhood." Vanessa listened closely, her heart tightening as she empathized with Marcus's experience. She noticed Pierce sitting next to her, nodding thoughtfully. When Marcus finished, Pierce leaned forward, addressing him directly. "Marcus, thank you for sharing that," Pierce said. "This is exactly why we're here, to learn from each other and to find ways to improve. Our goal is to make sure that situations like yours, and like Senator Carter's, don't happen again." Vanessa was impressed by Pierce's sincerity. She hadn't expected him to be so open, but he seemed genuinely committed to building bridges. In that moment, she realized that they shared a common goal. They both wanted to see the community thrive, free from fear or resentment. The forum continued with more community members sharing their stories, some filled with anger and pain, others with cautious hope. As the night went on, Vanessa felt a powerful sense of solidarity with those around her. This wasn't just about her journey. It was a collective effort, one that required the voices of everyone present. A few days after the town hall, Officer Green requested a private meeting with Vanessa. Green's suspension had been lifted following her completion of the training program, and though she was back on duty, she remained under close observation by the department. She was now ready to speak with Vanessa face to face, to address what had happened without the formalities of a public forum. The two women met at a small cafe on the outskirts of town, away from the usual attention. Vanessa arrived first, ordering a coffee and finding a quiet booth by the window. She glanced outside, watching the world go by, mentally preparing herself for the conversation ahead. When Green walked in, she looked uncharacteristically nervous. Gone was the strict, no-nonsense officer Vanessa had encountered months ago. In her place was a woman who seemed burdened, humbled by the events that had followed their initial confrontation. "Senator Carter," Green said, her voice barely above a whisper as she slid into the booth across from Vanessa. "Vanessa is fine," she replied, offering a faint smile. Green took a shaky breath, folding her hands on the table. "Vanessa, I wanted to thank you for agreeing to meet with me. I owe you an apology. What I did was wrong. I let my own assumptions get in the way of my duty, and I'm truly sorry for the pain I caused you." Vanessa studied her face, seeing the genuine remorse in Green's eyes. She felt a mix of emotions: anger, forgiveness, empathy, all swirling together. She had waited for this moment, but now that it was here, she found herself unsure of what to say. "Thank you, Bethany," Vanessa replied, choosing her words carefully. "I appreciate your apology. It wasn't easy to go through that experience, but it's clear to me now that you've reflected on what happened. I can accept your apology, but I also hope you understand the responsibility that comes with wearing that badge." Green nodded, her gaze steady. "Ido, this whole experience has made me question a lot of things I took for granted. I'm working on it, and I'm grateful for the chance to make things right." Vanessa nodded slowly, feeling a sense of closure. She hadn't been sure what to expect from this meeting, but in that moment, she realized that Green's growth was a testament to the power of accountability. Change, she realized, wasn't just about policies or training programs. It was about people, individuals who were willing to acknowledge their mistakes and make amends. As they parted ways, Vanessa felt a lightness she hadn't felt in months. The journey wasn't over, but this chapter was finally closing, making way for new beginnings. With Green's apology behind her, Vanessa returned her focus to the reform efforts. The police department, with the help of Vanessa and community leaders, launched a new initiative called Building Bridges, a community engagement program designed to foster trust between law enforcement and the public. The program included regular town halls, ride-alongs, and bias training sessions that were mandatory for all officers. Vanessa herself attended some of the training sessions, where she shared her story and encouraged officers to look beyond their assumptions. One afternoon, during a training session, Vanessa watched as a group of officers listened to an instructor talk about implicit bias. The instructor encouraged them to examine their own behaviors, to question their own judgments, and to understand how their actions could impact others. After the session, a young officer approached Vanessa, his expression serious. "Senator Carter, I wanted to thank you for what you're doing. I joined the force because I wanted to help people, but it's easy to forget that helping sometimes means checking yourself first." Vanessa smiled, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. "Thank you, officer. I believe you can make a difference, too." It all starts with awareness. The program's impact began to ripple through the department. Officers reported feeling more connected to the communities they served, and the feedback from the public was overwhelmingly positive. For the first time in a long time, Vanessa felt that the work she was doing was creating tangible change. A few months into the program, Vanessa was asked to join the department's first community review board meeting, where local residents would participate in the oversight of certain cases involving officer conduct. The idea was to increase transparency and give the public a voice in decisions affecting them directly. The board consisted of a diverse group: teachers, small business owners, youth advocates, and a retired officer who had volunteered to serve as a liaison between the community and the police. Vanessa was invited as an advisor to provide guidance and ensure the board maintained its focus on fairness and accountability. The meeting opened with a case review, a minor incident involving a traffic stop where the individual detained felt they'd been unfairly targeted. The officer in question was present, and so was the civilian who had filed the complaint. Vanessa listened as both sides shared their experiences. The officer explained his perspective, his voice respectful but firm. The civilian recounted his frustration, his voice wavering as he described the fear he felt during the stop. The board discussed the details carefully, weighing each perspective. After a respectful debate, they recommended that the officer complete an additional training course on community relations. Both parties were satisfied with the outcome, and as they left, Vanessa felt proud of the board's balanced approach. This board, she realized, was a sign of progress. It wasn't perfect, but it was a step toward a more equitable system, one that valued accountability and transparency. Watching the process unfold, Vanessa felt a deep sense of satisfaction, knowing that her efforts had led to this moment. As the year drew to a close, Vanessa received an invitation from the mayor's office to speak at the city's annual New Year's Community Summit. The event was dedicated to celebrating local leaders and initiatives that had made a positive impact on the community over the past year, and Vanessa was honored to be included among them. Standing before the crowd, Vanessa took a moment to appreciate how far they had come. The past year had been one of the most challenging of her career, but it had also been one of the most rewarding. She had witnessed the power of empathy, of humility, and of the courage to admit when one is wrong. As she spoke, she shared her gratitude for the journey, for the people who had supported her, and for the community that had rallied around her. She acknowledged the progress they had made and reminded everyone that the path to true justice was an ongoing one. "Our work is far from finished," Vanessa said, her voice strong and clear. "But together we've proven that change is possible. We've shown that when we come together, when we listen to one another, we can create a community that is not only safe but fair. A community where everyone feels seen and valued." The audience erupted in applause, and Vanessa felt a swell of emotion. This was more than just a victory, it was a testament to the resilience of her community and the power of unity. As she stepped down from the podium, Vanessa felt a sense of peace. She had taken a difficult experience and turned it into an opportunity for growth, not just for herself but for those around her. And she knew that as long as she continued to lead with compassion, there would always be hope for a better tomorrow. In the year following the reforms, the community began to see tangible improvements in its relationship with local law enforcement. The Building Bridges program gained popularity, with officers volunteering to join community events, host forums, and participate in neighborhood cleanups. Officers were also encouraged to attend cultural competency workshops and implicit bias training, a practice that fostered deeper understanding and empathy. One evening, Vanessa was invited to a local celebration honoring the program's success. The event was held in a public park under twinkling lights, with tables set up for families, food trucks offering local favorites, and a small stage where local artists performed. It was a rare occasion where everyone seemed to come together not as citizens and officers, but as neighbors. As Vanessa moved through the crowd, shaking hands and receiving warm smiles, she felt an overwhelming sense of accomplishment. Her fight for accountability had evolved into something far greater than herself. It had become a movement that everyone in the community owned. She could see it in the way people greeted the officers with genuine warmth, the way parents let their children run up to them without hesitation. Vanessa spotted Lieutenant Pierce speaking with a group of high school students, sharing stories about his early years on the force. His easy demeanor and honest answers had won him a reputation as one of the most approachable officers, and the students listened eagerly, inspired by his humility. As Vanessa watched, Pierce caught her gaze and walked over, his face lighting up with a warm smile. "Senator Carter," he greeted her, shaking her hand. "You did this," she chuckled, shaking her head. "We did this. I couldn't have done it without you and everyone else who believed in the cause." Pierce nodded, glancing around the crowd with pride. "You know, I've seen a lot of changes over the years, but nothing quite like this. Feels different, real." Vanessa nodded in agreement. "That's because it is. People feel seen, respected. That's the foundation of any strong community." After completing her mandatory training and undergoing additional bias evaluation, Officer Bethany Green returned to her duties with a renewed perspective. She knew she still had a lot to prove, to herself, to her colleagues, and to the community. And this time, She was determined to approach her role with the humility and understanding she had once overlooked. One morning, Bethany was assigned to mentor a group of new recruits as part of the Building Bridges program. The department had recognized her growth and saw potential for her to lead by example, helping shape the next generation of officers in a way that promoted respect and empathy. As she spoke to the young officers about the importance of transparency and accountability, Bethany found herself recalling her own experiences. She shared her story openly, explaining how her own misjudgments had led to a turning point in her career and her perspective. "I won't sugarcoat it," she told the group. "I made a mistake, a serious one, but it was in that moment that I learned the most important lesson of my career. You're not just enforcing laws, you're building trust. Every interaction, every choice you make matters. Don't take that for granted." The recruits listened, their expressions reflecting the weight of her words. Bethany knew she couldn't erase the past, but she could use it as a stepping stone toward a better future. In mentoring these recruits, she found a sense of purpose that gave her hope, a chance to leave a positive legacy in the community she served. As Vanessa continued her work in the community, her relationship with her mother, Lydia, grew even stronger. Lydia had always been Vanessa's rock, the voice of encouragement during the darkest days of the controversy. One evening, as Vanessa returned home from a meeting, she found a letter on her kitchen counter with Lydia's handwriting on the front. Vanessa opened it slowly, savoring the warmth of her mother's familiar script. "Dear Vanessa, I wanted to write you this letter because there are things I feel I can say better on paper than in person. You've always been a fighter from the moment you could speak. I've watched you stand up for others, put yourself on the line to make things right, and never once complain about the toll it took. What you did for this community, what you're still doing, it takes a special kind of strength. You took something painful, something unfair, and you turned it into a force for good. Not many people could do that, and it fills me with pride every time I see the difference you're making. So, keep going, Vanessa. Keep fighting for what's right because the world needs more people like you. With love and pride, Mom." Vanessa held the letter to her chest, her heart swelling with gratitude and love. Her mother's words were a reminder of why she'd fought so hard, why she would continue to fight. It was a promise, to her mother, to herself, and to the community she had come to love even more. Years later, the Building Bridges program became a model for similar initiatives in other cities across the state. Local news outlets reported on its success, highlighting reduced complaints of misconduct, stronger community relations, and a higher level of trust in the department. The Community Review Board also became a permanent part of the police oversight structure, ensuring that civilian voices were heard in cases of officer conduct. Vanessa had gone on to serve several more terms as a state senator, becoming a powerful advocate for transparency and reform in law enforcement. Her story had inspired others to run for office, to speak out against injustices, and to push for change in their own communities. On the anniversary of the Building Bridges program's founding, the city hosted an event to celebrate its impact. Vanessa was invited to speak, along with Lieutenant Pierce, Officer Green, and several other key figures who had been instrumental in the program's success. As Vanessa took the stage, she looked out over the crowd, feeling the familiar hum of energy and connection. She had spoken at countless events, but this one felt different. This one was a culmination of everything she had worked for, a legacy of unity, respect, and resilience. "Thank you for being here today," she began, her voice warm and steady. "A few years ago, this program was just an idea, a hope that we could create a community where trust and understanding came first. Today, I look around and see that hope brought to life, and I couldn't be prouder of the journey we've taken together." The audience broke into applause, and Vanessa saw familiar faces in the crowd. Marcus, the young man who had shared his story at that first town hall. Dr. Rivers, who had moderated so many of their forums, and even Officer Green, who stood alongside her fellow officers, her posture proud and assured. "I want each of you to know," Vanessa continued, "that this is only the beginning. We have shown what's possible when we work together, when we believe in each other, and when we refuse to let fear or misunderstanding divide us. We've built a foundation, but it's up to us to keep building." The applause grew louder, a collective expression of gratitude and pride. Vanessa stepped back, her heart full, knowing that this legacy was not just hers, but theirs, shared among everyone who had played a part in turning a difficult experience into a story of redemption and change. Several years after that fateful day in the parking lot, Vanessa sat down to write a memoir detailing her journey, hoping it would inspire others to believe in the power of resilience, forgiveness, and unity. In the final chapter, she recounted the moment she accepted Officer Green's apology, a moment that had taught her that sometimes healing came from meeting each other halfway. Forgiveness, she wrote, isn't about excusing someone's actions. It's about choosing to move forward, to allow growth, and to understand that we are all capable of change. My story isn't just about justice. It's about hope, about the belief that we can be better together. As Vanessa finished the last line, she felt a sense of peace settle over her. She knew that the work would continue, that there would always be more to do, but she was ready for whatever lay ahead. Her story was a testament to the impact one person could have, and the legacy they could leave behind. And as long as there were people willing to listen, to learn, and to stand up for what was right, Vanessa knew that legacy would endure. 6 months after the anniversary celebration of building bridges, Vanessa attended a small ceremony in her district. The event was dedicated to honoring both the individuals who had participated in the reform efforts and the families who had supported their loved ones through a period of transformation. This ceremony marked the formal adoption of building bridges as a statewide program, a testament to its success and the community's dedication to transparency and trust. Standing among the crowd, Vanessa felt a powerful sense of fulfillment. The journey had begun with her painful experience in a parking lot. Yet here she was, witnessing the ripple effect of one small stand for justice. She marveled at how that moment had grown into a movement, one that now served as a model for other cities hoping to bridge gaps in understanding and rebuild fractured relationships. Lieutenant Pierce approached her, smiling warmly. "Senator Carter," he said, clasping her hand, "your leadership has changed this community. I can't tell you how many officers have come to me over the last year, thanking me for the new direction we're heading." Vanessa nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I'm grateful, Lieutenant, but I have to give credit to everyone who put in the work to make it possible. Change like this can't happen in a vacuum." Pierce's expression softened. "You're right. It's been a collaborative effort, but none of us would have started this journey without your courage to speak out. The officers, the community, even myself, we all had to look in the mirror and confront hard truths. It's made us better, not just as a department, but as individuals." As they spoke, Vanessa noticed Officer Green standing nearby, chatting with some younger officers. There was a warmth in Green's demeanor that Vanessa hadn't seen before, a kindness that suggested she was beginning to see her work through a new lens. Watching her interact with her colleagues, Vanessa felt a quiet pride, not in herself, but in Green, who had taken an intensely personal journey towards self-awareness. Their eyes met briefly, and Green offered a subtle nod, a gesture of respect and acknowledgement. Vanessa returned it, feeling the weight of forgiveness settle between them like a promise. Unspoken, but deeply understood. One afternoon, several weeks after the statewide adoption of building bridges, Vanessa decided to visit her mother, Lydia, for lunch. She had an afternoon free, a rare occurrence these days, and wanted nothing more than to spend time in the cozy, familiar kitchen that had so often been her sanctuary. As she walked in, the smell of Lydia's famous roasted vegetables filled the air, and Vanessa felt herself relax instantly. Lydia greeted her with a warm hug, and they settled at the table, chatting about everything from family updates to the latest community events. At one point, Lydia looked at her daughter, her eyes twinkling with pride. "I've been hearing from everyone in town about the impact of your program," she said, reaching across the table to take Vanessa's hand. "You've made us all so proud, Vanessa. But I have to ask, do you feel it was worth everything you went through?" Vanessa paused, considering her answer. She thought back to the initial humiliation, the public scrutiny, and the sleepless nights of doubt. It had been one of the hardest experiences of her life, but looking at her mother now, Vanessa realized that it had brought her to a place of purpose she hadn't known was possible. Yes, Mom, she replied, her voice steady. It was worth every moment. It taught me resilience, and it reminded me of why I went into public service. I don't think I would be the person I am today without it. Lydia nodded, her expression thoughtful. You know, Vanessa, sometimes the hardest things we go through lead us exactly where we're meant to be. I couldn't be prouder of the woman you've become. Vanessa felt a lump in her throat, the depth of her mother's love and pride resonating in her heart. She realized then that this journey wasn't just her own. It was one her family, her friends, and her community had all taken with her, each contributing in their own way. Meanwhile, Officer Green found herself embracing her role as a mentor with unexpected enthusiasm. She had become a valuable resource for new recruits, helping them navigate the complexities of serving with both authority and empathy. Her experience had taught her that policing was more than enforcing rules. It was about guiding, supporting, and understanding the people she encountered. One evening, during a training session, a young recruit approached her, eyes wide with admiration. Officer Green, I heard about your journey and the reforms you helped bring about. I just wanted to say, it's inspiring. I hope I can make a difference like that one day.